The unexpected encounter. It was just another quiet evening. The sky was clear, and the stars began to twinkle in the distance. Jacob, a young man in his early 20s, had just finished his shift at a small diner. His body ached from the long hours of standing, but he was used to it. He had learned to live with the routine. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Nothing ever seemed to change in his small town. As he walked home, the cool night air felt good against his skin. It was peaceful, and the sounds of the crickets filled the night. Jacob was lost in thought, wondering if anything would ever happen that could change the dullness of his life. Maybe he was just tired, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different tonight. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. Then suddenly, a loud crash broke the silence. Jacob froze. The sound had come from the woods to the left of him, a thick forest that no one ever entered. He had always heard strange stories about that forest, but they were just rumors, right? No one really believed in them. But something about the noise felt real. It didn't sound like a falling tree or an animal. It was too sharp, almost unnatural. Jacob's heart began to race. Was it a plane crash or something else? Curiosity got the better of him, and without thinking, he ran toward the noise. The path into the woods was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to walk through at a time. Jacob pushed past the branches, his breath heavy in his chest as his eyes scanned the dark forest ahead. The air smelled fresh and damp, the ground soft under his shoes. He could see nothing clearly in the dim light, but he kept moving forward. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew colder. A strange chill settled over him, as if the temperature had dropped in an instant. It didn't feel natural, but Jacob couldn't turn back now. He had to know what had happened. The sound of the crash had stopped, replaced by a quiet hum in the air. It was unlike anything Jacob had ever heard before, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to come from all directions. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He slowed his pace, his every step careful. Then, just ahead, through the trees, he saw a glow. At first, he thought it was a campfire, but as he drew closer, the light became more intense, a strange blue-green color, unlike any fire he had ever seen. The glow pulsed, as if alive, and a feeling of both awe and fear washed over him. Jacob felt a surge of adrenaline, but he couldn't look away. He was almost drawn to it. He stepped out from behind a thick bush and into a clearing. And there it was. A large object, shaped like a metallic disc, lay on the ground, smoking slightly at the edges. It was much larger than anything Jacob had ever seen before, and the technology it displayed was beyond anything in his world. The surface of the object shimmered, reflecting the faint light of the stars. It was as if it didn't belong here, like it had come from somewhere far, far away. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. He stood there, stunned, trying to process what he was seeing. His mind raced. Was this some kind of secret government project? Or was it something else? He couldn't decide, but his gut told him this was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Just as he was about to take another step forward, a figure appeared before him, almost as if materializing from the shadows. It was a woman, or rather, something that looked like a woman. She was tall, her body slender and graceful, with skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her hair was long, flowing like liquid silver, and her eyes glowed a bright, unnatural blue. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. She didn't look human. She wasn't human. The woman stared at him for a moment, her eyes piercing into his soul, before she spoke in a soft, melodic voice. "We must bond," she said, her words carrying an air of finality. Her voice had an almost otherworldly quality, calm but commanding. Jacob's mouth went dry. What did she mean? Bond. He couldn't speak at first, his mind trying to process everything that had just happened. Was this a dream? Was he hallucinating? She took a step toward him, her presence almost magnetic. "I know you don't understand," she continued, her voice smooth, "but our worlds are now linked. You and I, we are connected. Jacob was still frozen in place, his mind spinning. She was an alien. There was no other explanation. His entire life had just been turned upside down in an instant. How could this be happening? He wanted to run, to escape, but something inside him told him to stay. He didn't know why, but he felt an undeniable pull toward her. The woman's gaze softened, and she tilted her head slightly. "I understand your fear," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "But there is no time. The bond must be completed, or our worlds will be destroyed." Jacob didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to think. Everything he had known had been turned on its head, and now he was standing in front of an alien, with her claiming that they were somehow connected. He couldn't even process the reality of it all. The woman stepped even closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You have no choice," she whispered. "We must bond." Jacob stood there, heart racing, as the night air seemed to grow heavier around him. What could he do? What was happening? And most of all, why him? The uncertainty hung in the air, as a sense of dread filled the silence between them. Jacob knew that whatever happened next, his life was never going to be the same again. The bonding ritual. Jacob stood still, frozen by the alien woman's words. The air around him hummed with energy, and his heart pounded in his chest. "We must bond," she had said. The words echoed in his mind, making his head spin. He wanted to run, to escape the strange pull he felt toward her, but his legs felt like they were made of stone. His gaze flickered to the glowing craft behind her, the source of the strange light that had drawn him here. The glowing metal of the ship still shimmered like a mirage, its strange beauty almost hypnotic. The alien girl, there was no other word for her, seemed to sense his hesitation. Her eyes softened, and she took another step toward him. Jacob could feel the weight of her gaze. It was as if she could see straight through him, into his very soul. Her voice, though gentle, carried an undeniable strength. "The bond is not just a connection," she continued, her tone calmer now, almost reassuring. "It is a force that links two fates together. Once it is complete, it cannot be undone." Jacob swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What does that even mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him with a faint sadness in her eyes, as if she knew he wasn't ready to understand. "It means that you and I will be bound to each other, not just in this moment, but forever," she said, as though the answer was obvious. "Our energies will merge, and through that, we will become stronger. It will protect us." "From what?" Jacob asked, his mind racing. He felt an overwhelming need to understand, to make sense of everything. But the more she spoke, the more confusing it became. "From the dangers that are coming," she replied, her gaze shifting briefly to the distant tree line. "There are forces that will try to tear us apart. If we do not bond, if we do not connect now, both our worlds will fall into darkness." Jacob's thoughts were scattered, torn between disbelief and the undeniable feeling that this moment was far more important than he could comprehend. He opened his mouth to speak again, but she stopped him with a single gesture, her hand raised slightly, palm out, as if sensing his confusion. "The ritual is simple," she explained. "We must exchange our energy, our life force. It will be a shared exchange, each of us giving a part of ourselves. Once the bond is complete, our lives will be tied together forever." Jacob took a step back, shaking his head. "I don't even know you. I don't know who you are or where you came from." He was almost pleading, the fear in his voice unmistakable. The alien girl's eyes softened again, and she stepped closer, her presence calming in a way he couldn't explain. "I know you fear this," she said gently, "but it is the only way. You were chosen, not by me, but by fate itself." "Chosen?" Jacob repeated, his voice thick with skepticism. "How could I be chosen for something like this? I'm just a guy from a small town. Nothing special about me." Her lips curved into a faint smile, one that held both mystery and understanding. "You are more special than you know," "Jacob," she said, her voice a soft melody. "In your world, you are ordinary, but in the grand scheme of the universe, your potential is limitless. That is why you were chosen." Jacob's mind raced. He wasn't sure what to believe. This alien woman, who had appeared out of nowhere, was now telling him that his life had some kind of cosmic purpose. He wanted to run, to find a way out of this, but something deep inside him, the same force that had drawn him to the woods in the first place, kept him rooted to the spot. "I can't do this," he said, almost in desperation, his voice shaky. "I'm not ready. This is too much. I don't even know how this ritual works." "You are more capable than you think," she assured him. "The energy you carry is not something you understand yet, but once we begin the ritual, it will awaken within you." She stepped closer again, her glowing blue eyes locked onto his with an intensity that left no room for argument. Jacob felt his heart skip a beat, his pulse quickening as she reached out to touch his arm. The instant her fingers made contact, an electric jolt ran through his body, like 1,000 sparks of energy racing through his veins. He gasped and jerked back, but she was calm, her touch not forceful but gentle, almost as if she were offering comfort. "Do not be afraid," she said, her voice now carrying a deep, reassuring quality. "The energy exchange will not harm you. In fact, it will make you stronger than you've ever been." Jacob swallowed hard, staring at her hand on his arm. Every part of him wanted to pull away, but the strange warmth from her touch seemed to be calming the storm of fear inside him. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and he felt as though the world had fallen away. There was only the two of them, the alien girl and himself, standing in the heart of the forest beneath a sky full of stars. For a moment, Jacob hesitated. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a heavy stone. Was this really happening? Was he about to become part of something so much bigger than himself? With a deep breath, he nodded slowly, his voice trembling. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll do it. I'll trust you." The alien girl's expression softened into something almost like relief. "Good," she whispered. "Then let us begin." And with that, she guided him closer to the metallic craft, where the ritual would begin. Jacob felt a strange pull in his chest as he followed her, his mind both terrified and intrigued by the path he was about to walk. Little did he know, this moment would change everything for him. His world, his future, and even his very identity would never be the same. Unraveling the truth. The ritual had begun, and Jacob was completely unsure of what he was doing. He was standing next to the alien girl. Her name, he learned, was Zara, and she had just led him to the heart of the glowing craft, which seemed to pulse with an almost sentient energy. The air around them was thick with the strange hum that had filled the forest when he first approached her. Everything felt surreal, as though reality itself was bending around him. Yet there was no turning back now. Zara turned to face him, her expression serious but not unkind. "The bond must be completed soon, Jacob," she said, her voice soft but firm, "or our worlds will be lost." Jacob could barely process the words. "What do you mean, our worlds will be lost?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What's happening? Why me?" Zara's eyes flickered to the glowing ship behind her, her expression unreadable for a moment. She took a deep breath, as though gathering her thoughts before speaking. "My world, Ilara, is dying. It's a planet far from here, in a distant part of the galaxy. We've tried everything to save it. Our technology, our science, even our best minds. But nothing has worked. The energy that once kept our planet alive is fading. And now, there is only one chance left." Jacob's mind reeled at her words. "Your planet is dying," he repeated, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "But I don't understand. How does this have anything to do with me? What do I have to do with saving your world?" Zara gave him a long look, her eyes bright with an emotion that was part sorrow, part hope. "The energy I speak of, It is something that once connected all living beings across the universe. It was a power so vast that it held entire worlds in harmony. But over time, it was forgotten. My people, we lost the ability to channel it. And now, only one force can restore it: the bond between our kinds. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. You're saying that I, just a normal guy, am supposed to somehow help save your planet? The thought seemed impossible. He was no hero. He didn't have special powers or any sort of extraordinary strength. He was just a young man with a boring job in a small town. Zara nodded slowly, her gaze steady. Yes, Jacob, you were chosen. And it was not by my will alone. The bond between our species has existed for centuries, a bond that links us even when we are unaware of it. It has been dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And that moment is now. Jacob's mind was spinning. Chosen? For what? He had no idea what kind of power she was talking about. How could a connection between him and an alien race save an entire planet? The thought of it was too overwhelming, and yet here he was, standing before someone from another world, being told that his life would be forever changed. Why me, though? He asked, his voice filled with confusion. Why not someone else? What makes me special? Zara's face softened, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke. Because your world has a unique energy. It is the energy we need to revive Ilara. It is the energy of resilience, of survival. Your species, you have something within you that we lost long ago. And that is what will save us. Jacob stared at her, still trying to process the gravity of what she was saying. His thoughts were like a tangled mess of disbelief and fear. How could he, a simple human, carry such immense responsibility? How could he have the power to save a planet? Zara seemed to sense his uncertainty. I know this is difficult to understand, she said gently, but the bond is not just a merging of energy. It is a merging of destinies. When we connect, you will feel what I feel, know what I know. You will see the history of my people and the truth of our past. Jacob's breath hitched. He didn't want to think about the weight of it all, but he couldn't deny the strange pull that had drawn him to this moment. A part of him was terrified, but another part, a deeper, more instinctual part, felt that this was somehow the right thing to do. You'll understand soon, Zara continued. The energy between us will show you everything. You'll understand why this bond is the only hope we have. Before Jacob could ask anything more, Zara raised her hand, and the soft hum of the ship grew louder. The craft itself seemed to respond to her, its lights flashing with a brilliance that blinded him for a moment. Then she closed her eyes, and her voice became a low chant, words in a language Jacob didn't understand. Yet somehow he could feel their meaning deep in his chest. The air around them thickened, the energy palpable, as if the world itself was shifting. Jacob felt a strange sensation deep within him, a pull at the core of his being. It was as if something inside him was awakening, something that had been dormant for his entire life. The power was undeniable, a force that connected him to Zara in ways he couldn't yet explain. Suddenly, images flooded his mind, flashes of a world unlike anything he had ever seen. Vast cities that stretched into the sky, glowing with a light that was not of this earth. A lush, vibrant planet filled with life and beauty. Then the images shifted. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, consuming the land, turning it from green and thriving to desolate and lifeless. The cities, once magnificent, were now in ruins, their lights flickering out, one by one. Jacob gasped as the flood of images overwhelmed him. He saw the faces of the Ilara people, pale-skinned and elegant, their eyes full of sorrow and fear. He felt their pain, their fear, their desperation. They had once been a proud race, their technology advanced, and their world full of life. But something had gone wrong, something that Jacob still couldn't fully understand. The planet had been dying, and now, it seemed, it was up to him to stop it. As the images faded, Jacob staggered back, his breath shallow. Zara opened her eyes, her expression filled with an intensity that matched the power he had just felt. "This is why you were chosen," she said quietly. "You have the energy we need. You will be the key to restoring balance, to saving my people. Together, we will save Ilara." Jacob stood there, still trying to grasp what had just happened. He had seen things, felt things, that couldn't be real, and yet they were. Somehow, his life had become part of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. And now, there was no turning back. A dangerous connection. The bond was no longer just a concept. It was real, tangible, and it burned through Jacob's body like fire and ice, all at once. As the images from Zara's memories faded, he was left with a hollow sense of awe and dread. The weight of the connection they shared was overwhelming, more than anything he could have prepared for. Every beat of his heart now seemed tied to hers. Every breath he took felt like it belonged to both of them. And somewhere deep inside, a part of him realized that this was only the beginning. The world around him blurred for a moment as he tried to regain his bearings. The metallic craft behind them hummed in response to the energy flowing between them, the ship almost alive with the force of the connection. Jacob staggered slightly, his mind still struggling to absorb everything he had just witnessed. Zara reached out and steadied him, her cool, ethereal touch grounding him in the present. "You are stronger than you know, Jacob," she said, her voice low but filled with confidence. "But the bond is still fragile. We must strengthen it before the darkness catches up with us." Jacob's head spun. He could still feel the remnants of the images, the memories of Ilara, the lush forests, the shimmering cities, and the vast oceans, haunting him like distant dreams. The alien world had become part of him, and he couldn't shake the sense of responsibility that now weighed heavily on his shoulders. It was as if the fate of a planet, of an entire species, rested on his very soul. I don't know if I can handle this," Jacob admitted, his voice shaky. "I'm not ready. I didn't sign up for any of this." He looked at Zara, his gaze desperate. "How can I possibly save a world I don't even know?" Zara's eyes softened with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "This was never about being ready, Jacob. It's about the choices we make. You have already chosen by agreeing to this bond. You are more connected to Ilara than you realize. The energy you carry is ancient, a part of this universe's core. You were always meant to be the one to restore balance. But the danger, the darkness that I spoke of, it is growing stronger with every passing moment." Jacob looked over his shoulder, half expecting to see some kind of danger lurking in the shadows, but nothing was there. The forest was still, almost eerily so. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Zara, sensing his unease, continued, "We are not alone. There are those who would do anything to prevent the bond from being completed. They are after us, after you. They will stop at nothing to see Ilara destroyed." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. "Who are they? Who's after us?" His voice grew louder, a mix of fear and confusion rising in his chest. "The ones who hunt us are the agents of the Korath," Zara said, her voice steady, but Jacob could hear the underlying tension. "They are merciless. They serve the dark energy that has been spreading through the galaxy. They were once part of the Ilara people, but their hearts turned cold, consumed by the need for power. They want the energy of the bond for themselves, to control it and use it to dominate entire worlds." Jacob's blood ran cold at the thought. The Korath were real, and they were hunting them, hunting him. "How do we stop them?" Jacob asked, his voice barely a whisper, dread pooling in his stomach. "How do we fight something like that?" Zara looked at him with a steely gaze, determination in her eyes. "The bond must be completed. The energy between us will give us the power to face the Korath. But there is more to it than that. We must learn to harness the energy, to control it. You have to trust the bond and allow it to guide you." Jacob nodded, though a sinking feeling told him that trusting the bond wasn't going to be easy. How could he trust something that was still so new to him? something that felt so alien. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden flicker of lights coming from the distance. His instincts screamed at him to move, to run. But Zara's calm voice stopped him. "They are here," she said quietly. Her eyes locked onto the glowing horizon. "We don't have much time. We need to complete the bonding ritual now, or the Koreth will find us." Jacob's breath caught in his throat. His body tensed, preparing for the fight that was about to unfold. The moment he had dreaded was now upon him. The bond between him and Zara was their only hope, their only chance of survival. But how could he use it against an enemy like the Koreth? Zara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her form glowing even brighter. "Focus, Jacob," she instructed. "You must center yourself. Feel the energy flowing between us. It's in you now as much as it is in me. Use it to protect us." Jacob closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind. He could feel the strange warmth in his chest, a fire that was both foreign and familiar. It was a power that pulsed in time with his heartbeat, as if it had always been there, just waiting to be awakened. He reached for it, but when his hand opened, it felt like nothing was there. "Concentrate," Zara urged, her voice soft but insistent. "The bond is not just something you use. It is something you become. It is a part of you, as much as your own soul." Jacob focused harder, trying to quiet the storm in his mind. The energy that Zara spoke of was real. He could feel it, deep, ancient, and strong. But it was so vast, so incomprehensible, that he wasn't sure how to control it. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath his feet, and a loud screeching sound pierced the air. A dark shadow loomed over the horizon, cutting through the sky like a black storm. The Koreth had arrived. Zara's hand shot out, her fingers glowing with the same energy that now hummed through Jacob's veins. "It's time," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. Jacob took a deep breath, then reached out with everything he had. His fear, his uncertainty, and his raw, untapped power. The bond between him and Zara flared to life, and for the first time, he felt it, felt the energy rushing through his veins, like electricity, like pure force. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The Koreth were getting closer. Jacob could hear their voices now, distorted and echoing in the distance. Their presence was heavy, oppressive, a dark weight that threatened to crush them both. But Jacob wasn't alone. Zara was with him, and the bond between them had become something more than just a connection. It was a weapon that could save them. "Focus," Zara whispered. "Now, Jacob, together." Jacob closed his eyes again, allowing the power to surge within him. And for the first time, he felt the bond truly connect. The energy poured from him in a brilliant wave, a burst of light that illuminated the entire forest. It was the energy of life, of survival, of hope, and it was enough to push back the darkness. The Koreth, sensing the power, hesitated for a brief moment, their advance slowing. But Jacob could feel them closing in, their malice palpable in the air. He didn't know how long they could hold them off. But right now, in this moment, he was ready to face whatever came next. He was ready to fight. The chase begins. The crackling energy of the bond pulsed through Jacob, like a heartbeat that was not just his own, but shared with Zara. It felt like the world had tilted, and the air around them vibrated with the power they had just unleashed. The Koreth were close now, so close that Jacob could almost taste the danger on the wind. He had felt their presence before, that shadowy, oppressive feeling creeping in at the edges of his awareness. But now it was real, tangible. The hunt had begun. Zara's eyes flickered toward the sky, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "They are here. We must leave, now." Jacob barely had time to process her words before the ground beneath them shook once more, and a deep guttural sound pierced the air. A mechanical hum, growing louder by the second. The Koreth were closing in fast, their dark ships cutting through the atmosphere like predatory birds. Zara grabbed his arm, her grip strong despite her delicate appearance, and with a quick motion, she pulled him toward the edge of the clearing. "Follow me," she urged, her voice sharp and commanding, the urgency in her tone unmistakable. Jacob didn't question her. He was still adjusting to the new reality that had unfolded around him, the sudden surge of power coursing through his veins. But now, there was no time for fear. The Koreth were coming, and every second mattered. Zara led him through the dense forest with surprising speed, her long strides leaving no room for hesitation. The trees around them seemed to part willingly, almost as if the forest itself recognized the energy flowing through them. Jacob followed, pushing past branches and underbrush, his heart racing with both adrenaline and dread. Every sound in the forest felt amplified. The snap of a twig underfoot, the rustle of leaves in the wind, all of it heightened by the raw intensity of the chase. They ran in silence, Zara's movements fluid and graceful, almost like she was part of the forest itself. Jacob struggled to keep up, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The bond between them, he could still feel it, still sense her presence in his mind, a constant undercurrent of energy that kept him going. The more he focused on it, the more he could hear her thoughts, her fears, and her resolve. She was just as terrified as he was, but she was determined. She had to be. If she wasn't, they wouldn't survive this. The first Koreth ship appeared above the trees, its silhouette a dark shadow against the starlit sky. It moved quickly, almost effortlessly, as if it had no weight. Jacob could see the shape of the ship now, its sleek design resembling a massive bird of prey with sharp angles and black, reflective plating. It was scanning the ground below, its lights sweeping over the forest like an unseen hand. The chill of its presence was almost suffocating. Zara didn't break her stride. "They are tracking us," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. "They know where we are. We need to reach the safe zone. The bond will help us hide from them, but we can't stay out in the open for long." "Safe zone?" Jacob asked, his voice strained with exhaustion. "Where's that?" "It's a place hidden deep within the forest," she explained, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "A sanctuary for those who are being hunted. We'll be safe there, for a time. But only if we make it there quickly." Jacob nodded, though his mind was still racing. How could they hide from an enemy so powerful? How could they possibly outrun the Koreth, whose ships were clearly faster and more advanced than anything he had ever seen? Zara's grip on his arm tightened as they plunged deeper into the forest. She was pulling him toward something, somewhere, but Jacob could barely keep up with the speed of her movements. His legs were aching, and his breath was coming in short, ragged bursts. He had never run this fast in his life. His mind was clouded with the knowledge that every step they took brought them closer to the danger they were trying to outrun. The sound of the Koreth ship grew louder, the low hum of its engines vibrating the very ground beneath them. Jacob could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on him, and he knew they were close to being found. The bond, what was once just a connection between him and Zara, now felt like a beacon in the darkness. Every time he thought of it, the power surged through him again, a wave of energy that filled him with strength, but also fear. It was a strange kind of strength, something both comforting and unsettling at the same time. They reached a ridge in the forest, and Zara suddenly stopped. She glanced back at Jacob, her eyes narrowing as she studied the shadows in the distance. Jacob couldn't see anything, but he could feel the Koreth closing in. They were close. Too close. "Stay low," Zara whispered urgently, crouching down behind a large boulder. "We need to hide. Focus on the bond. Let it shield us." Jacob did as she instructed, dropping to the ground behind the boulder. The air was thick with tension, and he could hear the distant roar of the Koreth ship circling above them. His pulse raced in his ears, and his mind was a whirl of thoughts: survival, escape, the bond, and the fate of an entire world resting on his shoulders. Zara crouched beside him, her eyes closed in concentration. "Focus, Jacob," she said, her voice steady. "Think of the bond. Let it flow between us. Let it hide us from them." Jacob took a deep breath, closing his eyes and reaching out with his mind, trying to connect with the strange, powerful force that now lived inside him. It wasn't easy. The energy was vast and complex, like trying to hold a storm in the palm of his hand. But he focused, narrowing his thoughts down to a single point: the bond between him and Sarah. For a moment, nothing happened. The world felt still, the sounds of the forest, and the Korath ship growing faint in the distance. But then, just as his thoughts were beginning to fade into doubt, a strange sensation washed over him. It was like a ripple in the air around them, a sudden shift, as if the very fabric of reality had bent and folded to protect them. The Korath ship passed overhead, its engines roaring as it searched the forest below. Jacob's heart raced in his chest, but Zara remained calm beside him, her eyes still closed in concentration. She was doing something, using the bond to cloak them, to keep them hidden from their enemies. The ship passed by without stopping, its searchlights sweeping across the landscape, but it didn't linger. Slowly, the sound of its engines faded into the distance. Jacob let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. They had made it. But the relief was short-lived. Jacob knew that the danger wasn't over. The Korath were still out there, still hunting them. And now they had only one choice: to keep running, to keep fighting, and to hope that the bond would be enough to save them. A test of strength and trust. The silence that followed the departure of the Korath ship was both a relief and a new kind of tension. Jacob and Zara remained hidden behind the boulder, hearts still racing, ears straining for any sound that might signal their enemies were closing in again. The forest was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the chase. The faint hum of the distant ship was the only thing that broke the stillness, but even that seemed to fade with every passing second. Zara's hand rested lightly on Jacob's arm, her touch calming but firm. "We are safe for now," she whispered, her voice low, but with a clarity that cut through the haze of fear and exhaustion that clouded Jacob's mind. "But we must move quickly. The Korath will not give up. They will search for us until they find us." Jacob nodded, though the words didn't quite settle in his mind. His legs were sore, and his breathing was still uneven. But more than that, his mind was filled with doubts. The bond between him and Sarah, which had felt so powerful in the moment of its awakening, now felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. It was strange, an invisible thread that connected them. Yes, but it wasn't as simple as that. He could feel her thoughts, her emotions, her fears, and it was overwhelming. He had never been one to carry the weight of someone else's emotions, let alone an entire planet's survival. "I don't know if I can do this," Jacob muttered, rubbing his face with his hands. "I'm not cut out for this, Sarah. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, or how to control this power." Zara didn't say anything for a moment, and Jacob wasn't sure if he was meant to continue. The bond between them was still strong, but it was also disorienting. There was too much happening inside him. Too much fear, too much unknown. It was hard to focus. Then Zara spoke, her voice filled with gentle yet undeniable strength. "The power is not something you control, Jacob," she said, her eyes meeting his. "It is something you become. The bond isn't about force or will. It's about trust. Trust in the connection between us, and trust in yourself." Jacob's eyes flickered to hers. He could see the sincerity in her gaze, but there was something else too, something deeper. She was speaking from experience, from a place of knowledge that Jacob couldn't yet understand. She had lived through the downfall of her world, the loss of everything she knew. And now she was putting her faith in him. "You have already taken the first step," she continued, her voice softening. "You agreed to the bond. Now you must trust in the energy that flows through you. You must trust that it will guide you, that it will protect us. This isn't just about saving my people. It's about saving yours too. The same power that is within you, within us, exists everywhere, in every living thing. You are connected to it. You are connected to everything." Jacob took a shaky breath, trying to process her words. But there was so much uncertainty swirling in his mind, so much fear of failure. He had never been a hero. He wasn't brave, wasn't special. And yet here he was, facing an enemy he didn't fully understand, carrying the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. He closed his eyes, trying to focus, to listen to the bond between them, but the energy inside him felt wild, chaotic, like an ocean ready to crash. "I don't know if I can trust it," Jacob said quietly, almost to himself. "What if I make it worse? What if I fail?" Zara moved closer, her presence steady and grounding. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "The fear you feel is natural," she said softly. "But fear will not save you. Trust, Jacob. Trust that the bond will guide you. You've already felt it, haven't you? The power that flows between us. The bond is stronger than your doubts, and when you trust it, it will strengthen you." Jacob closed his eyes again, focusing on her hand, on the warmth that spread from her touch into his chest. It wasn't like the way fear made his body tense up. It was a warmth that spread outward, filling him from within. For the first time, he felt the energy of the bond in its entirety. It was like a river flowing through him, strong, steady, and vast. He could feel it reaching outward, connecting him not just to Zara, but to the very world around him, to everything. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, the wind that brushed against his skin, the distant stars. Everything was connected. A sense of calm washed over him. It wasn't like magic or some grand transformation. It was simpler than that. It was a knowing, a quiet certainty that the energy he shared with Zara wasn't just for fighting. It wasn't just about survival. It was about life, about being part of something larger than himself. "I think I understand," Jacob said, his voice steadying as the fear inside him began to fade. "It's not about controlling it. It's about letting it guide me." Zara smiled, her expression soft and proud. "Yes, that is the first step. Now, let's see how well you can trust the bond." Jacob straightened, feeling the energy within him surging. He could feel Zara's presence beside him, a steady anchor as they both prepared for the next phase of their escape. But as much as he felt the power of the bond, something else was growing stronger too. The feeling that time was running out. They couldn't stay hidden for long. The Koreth would be back, and when they returned, they would be stronger, more determined. They had already sensed their connection, and they would stop at nothing to destroy it. "Let's move," Zara said, her voice firm. "The Koreth are relentless. We need to reach the sanctuary before they catch up to us." Jacob nodded, feeling the calm determination settle within him. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. The bond between him and Zara was real, and it wasn't just the key to saving her world. It was the key to saving his own. They moved forward, weaving through the trees, faster now, as the energy of the bond guided them. Jacob felt stronger than he had before, lighter, as though the weight of his doubts had been lifted. With every step, the power grew inside him, and though he was still uncertain, the trust he had in Zara, in the bond they shared, began to grow. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time, he felt like he was ready to face it. They were running out of time, but Jacob knew one thing: they wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. The power of the bond was with them, and it would lead them to the sanctuary, to the next step in the battle to save their worlds. The final battle, and forever linked. The forest felt like it was holding its breath as Jacob and Zara moved through the darkened woods, every step heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The night was still, but the air seemed to hum with the energy of the bond between them, an unseen current that flowed like an invisible thread connecting them, binding their fates together in a way Jacob still couldn't fully comprehend. His body, his mind, and his very soul had been altered by the connection. And now, there was no turning back. Zara's movements were swift and sure, but there was an unmistakable tension in her eyes, a quiet urgency. The sanctuary they sought was close, Jacob could feel it in his bones, but the Korath were still out there, hunting them. They had only moments before the final confrontation. "We're almost there," Zara said, her voice low but firm, her tone filled with determination. "Once we reach the sanctuary, we can rest, recover. But we can't let our guard down. The Korath will be relentless." Jacob didn't need to ask any more questions. He had already felt the change in himself, the surge of power that came from the bond. But he knew it wasn't enough to guarantee their safety. The Korath were formidable. Their technology was unmatched, and their will to dominate was unyielding. They were hunting Zara, and by extension, him. But now, Jacob wasn't just an observer of his fate. He was an active participant in it. The bond had given him strength, and now he had to trust it. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a deep, menacing roar that reverberated through the trees, sending a wave of terror down Jacob's spine. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a storm. It was the sound of the Korath. Their ships, their forces closing in on their position. Zara's eyes flickered to the horizon, and Jacob could see the fear in her gaze. For the first time, she seemed vulnerable, as if the weight of the mission had finally caught up to her. But even in that moment, she didn't falter. She grabbed his hand and pulled him forward with renewed urgency. "They're here," she said, a note of finality in her voice. "We don't have time to reach the sanctuary. We have to face them here now." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, the air thick with anticipation. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't prepared for the fight. But the bond surged within him, urging him forward, telling him that this was the moment he had been chosen for. He was no longer just a bystander. He was part of this war, part of the survival of two worlds. The first Korath ship appeared overhead, a shadow in the night sky. Its sleek black form seemed to swallow the light around it, its engines thrumming with power as it circled above them. Jacob could see the outlines of armored figures standing at its open hatch, their forms looming like dark specters. The Korath had arrived. Zara stood firm, her face a mask of determination, her glowing eyes fixed on the ship above. "We need to hold them off long enough for the bond to reach its full potential," she said, her voice steady. "Only then can we defeat them. Only then can we save my people, and yours." Jacob's mind raced. How could he fight them? What did he even have to fight with? The bond was powerful, but could it truly stand up against the Korath's ruthless technology? Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently as the first blast from the Korath ship struck the forest floor, sending dirt and debris flying in all directions. The shockwave knocked Jacob off his feet, and for a moment, everything went dark. His ears rang from the blast, and his chest burned with the force of the impact. "Jacob!" Zara's voice cut through the ringing in his ears, and he felt her hand on his shoulder, pulling him back to his feet. Her expression was tight with fear, but her resolve was unshaken. "Focus, Jacob. This is it. The bond will protect us, but we must act now." Jacob blinked, still disoriented from the blast. His vision cleared, and he could see the Korath forces moving swiftly toward them, their weapons raised. The bond between him and Zara pulsed in his chest, stronger than ever. The energy was alive within him, ready to be unleashed. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. This time, it was about fighting for everything that mattered. Zara's home, his own world, and the future of both. With a deep breath, Jacob reached for the energy within him. The power of the bond surged to the surface, a wave of light and heat that rippled through his body. He could feel Zara's presence beside him, her power joining with his, the two of them connected by an unbreakable force. They were no longer just two individuals fighting to survive. They were one, their energy intertwined, unstoppable. The first Korath soldiers advanced, their weapons glowing with a dark, otherworldly energy. But Jacob wasn't afraid anymore. The bond had given him a sense of strength, of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for Zara's world, for the future of everything they both held dear. With a roar, Jacob thrust his hand forward, and the power of the bond erupted from him in a brilliant flash of light. The energy surged outward, a torrent of raw power that sent the first wave of Korath soldiers flying backward, their armor crackling and sparking with the force of the impact. The Korath soldiers regrouped, furious and undeterred. But Jacob and Zara were ready. The bond pulsed again, a second wave of energy erupting from their combined forces. The Korath were pushed back once more, their advance halted by the sheer force of the light they could not comprehend. But the battle was far from over. Jacob could feel the Korath gathering their strength, preparing for another assault. They weren't going to stop, and neither could he. Zara moved beside him, her hand raised, and for a moment, the two of them were completely in sync. The bond between them wasn't just energy, it was a shared purpose, a shared strength that flowed seamlessly between them. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. Together, they could push back the darkness that threatened to consume everything. The final wave of Korath soldiers charged forward, weapons blazing, their dark figures casting long shadows in the night. But Jacob wasn't afraid. The bond had become part of him, and with Zara by his side, he knew they could face anything. With one final, decisive surge, the bond flared to life again. The air around them crackled with power, and the Korath forces were thrown back, their ship's engines sputtering as it crashed into the forest below. The battle was over. As the smoke cleared and the last of the Korath forces retreated, Jacob stood there, breathing heavily, the energy of the bond still swirling inside him. He turned to Zara, who was staring at him with wide, knowing eyes. "We did it," Jacob said, his voice hoarse, but filled with awe. "We really did it." Zara smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, Jacob," she said softly. "We did it. We're forever linked now. And together, we've saved both our worlds." In that moment, Jacob realized that the bond wasn't just about the power they shared. It was about trust, about the connection that had grown between them, a bond that transcended everything. It was a bond that would last forever, no matter the cost. And as the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, Jacob knew that he had found something far greater than survival. He had found a new purpose.